Hey everyone, welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking a massive and honestly wild contradiction in Colorado's child support system. On paper, it's a gleaming, beautifully crafted story of progressive reform. But when you dive into the gritty details of a recent federal civil rights lawsuit, you get a completely different picture. It's a deep dive into what actually happens when high-minded policy ideals violently collide with the cold, hard realities of administrative databases. Okay, I want you to picture two radically different realities sitting right next to each other. Officially, the public face of this system is an award-winning progressive utopia, right? We're talking neon bright praise for visionary leadership. But then you crack open this federal complaint, Hirschfeld v. Johnston, and it claims the system is actually a dystopian, lawless collection machine. It literally alleges that behind all those shiny awards lies a devastating administrative nihilism that destroys families. To really understand this contrast, we first have to look at the official record. For a decade, Director Heather O'Hare has been publicly celebrated for her leadership in Larimer County. The narrative is that she completely transformed human services into a, quote, shield of champions for vulnerable families, pioneering this massive shift away from rigid enforcement and toward actual family equity. And honestly, the progressive vision boasts some very impressive highlights. They champion this two-generation framework, which basically ties a kid's well-being directly to their parents' financial stability. They push legislative reforms to drop predatory interest rates and boost self-support reserves. The whole idea was the intentional deconstruction of financial debt traps. If you just look at the paper, it sounds like a total masterclass in equity-driven policy. But here is where the story takes a really sharp turn. Because when we pull the plug on that polished exterior, the federal lawsuit asks a terrifying question about the raw digital mechanics of the system. What actually happens when the administrative machine runs entirely without a judge? Let's get into the specific allegations. Look at the timeline of what the lawsuit calls the judicial void. Notice that staggering 7-year gap right in the middle? The complaint alleges that aggressive financial enforcement, we're talking serious wage garnishments, just kept rolling for years, even though the state's own digital system explicitly blocked the foundational court order from ever being entered. And get this, it wasn't some random software glitch. The automated database worked exactly like it was supposed to. As the official logs show, it threw up a hard stop command because mandatory Social Security numbers were missing. The lawsuit's core thesis is that human workers literally bypassed this digital red flag. They allegedly overrode the computer's built-in safeguards to just go ahead and aggressively collect the money anyway. Section 1, Status Inversion and the Causation Paradox. This is where things get completely surreal. Imagine two government bureaucracies completely contradicting each other, with a family caught right in the crossfire. South Dakota officially classified and funded the plaintiff as the primary custodial parent, but at the exact same time, Colorado was garnishing his wages, treating him like an absentee obligor. One state's left hand was funding the family, while the other state's right hand was aggressively tearing it apart. Now, here is where federal law comes in. There's a specific regulation that strictly prohibits collecting child support when a child is in state-funded, 24/7 residential care. It's pretty black and white. But the lawsuit claims Colorado's collection apparatus completely ignored this explicit federal rule for nearly 2 entire years. So, how do you justify taking money while the kid is locked in a treatment facility? Well, according to internal communications, Colorado technicians allegedly just used legal fictions. They credited the other parent with fictional overnight stays, theorizing she needed the money to, quote, maintain her home. They basically invented a reality just to keep the enforcement machinery churning, ignoring the physical location of the child. Let's move on to Section 2, Manufactured Insolvency and the Forensic Ledger. We absolutely have to talk about the real human toll here, because the lawsuit's forensic ledger is wild. Over $37,000. That is the mathematical floor for the restitution claim, based entirely on the state's own registry ledger. That's the net amount of money allegedly seized from the plaintiff without a valid, legally entered judicial order. And if we drill down even further into those numbers, over $12,000 of that was extracted exactly when the child was in state-funded residential treatment. That's the precise window where federal law explicitly says you cannot collect. But the financial ruin didn't stop at just seizing cash. Because the state allegedly reported this voided debt to credit bureaus. Starting even before the court system rejected the order, the plaintiff's FICO score tanked to a dismal 461. That effectively locked him completely out of the housing market. When you do the math on that kind of enforcement, it translates to real physical consequences. The complaint meticulously documents 527 days of state-engineered homelessness for the plaintiff. Just let that sink in for a second. It's a literal death spiral. In July 2023, Colorado suspends his driver's license over this voided debt. No license means he loses his mobility and his income. Losing his income means he loses his housing. And then South Dakota uses the fact that he's homeless as the justification to block his daughter from returning to him. The system allegedly manufactured his ruin and then punished him for being ruined. Which brings us to Section 3, ratification of the machine and system over safeguards. So how does an institution react when they are presented with all this evidence? In a 2026 letter bearing her signature, Director O'Hare officially reviewed the missing legal order. But instead of slamming the brakes, she defended the county's actions. She dismissed the computer stop command as a, quote, purely administrative function. The lawsuit points to this exact moment as the supposed visionary leadership officially rubber-stamping a massive constitutional failure. It's all summed up perfectly by a senior supervisor who stated that their enforcement remedies are based entirely on their own policy and procedures. According to the plaintiff, that right there strips away the progressive mask. It suggests the institution consciously chose its own internal rulebook over constitutional due process, judicial oversight, and the actual living families they claim to protect. So, I want to leave you with a chilling question to chew on as we wrap up this explainer. If a state's automated enforcement machinery can just autonomously override both digital safeguards and human lives to extract funds, who is actually left to pull the plug? Can you really claim to be a champion of equity if the very foundation of your system operates entirely outside the rule of law?